Welcome to Interviews from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlson, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on Telesur. Mexico City residents have staged protests and blocked streets, this time for something a lot of us take for granted: water. The mismanagement of this vital fluid has already affected millions of people in the country. Today on Interviews from Mexico, we'll talk about Mexico's water war. And we're very privileged to have in the studio Dr. Pedro Moctezuma. Pedro, thank you so much for joining us here on Interviews from Mexico.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Pedro Moctezuma is the coordinator of the Sustainability Program in the Autonomous University of Mexico and a co-founder of Water for All, a grassroots organization that defends access to water and quality of water in the entire country. Pedro, there's been a major push lately on the part of various levels of government to change the way Mexico manages its water in the face of what's been a crisis now for quite a while. Mm-hmm. One of the most important is what's called the Peña-Pichardo law that's being promoted on the national level. Could you tell us about this law?
It is very interesting to notice that this law is against the Constitution. The Constitution was reformed on February of 2012. And the Article 4 says that water has to be distributed equally and sustainably to all Mexicans. And also that water management has to be done not only by the government, but also by citizens' participation.
So this law was proposed by the president, and it actually contradicts the Constitution itself?
Yeah. Huh. This law proposes a very vertical way to manage water, leaving citizenship away from decision-making processes. This law doesn't promote sustainability. It is written to enable fracking, toxic mining, and big business, water exports, and a number of works that affect sustainability.
Those are all industries that have very intensive use of water.
Very intensive, and now they are freely wasting water, while there are 25 cities in Mexico that are on the brink of disaster.
How do you qualify a city of being on the brink of a water disaster?
Well, these the cities that have more than half of their population without access to everyday water.
In Mexico City,
in Mexico City, the eastern part of the city suffers huge water scarcity, and there is big inequality because the western part of the city has areas where every person has up to 500 liters per day, and in the east, many Mexicans do not have more than 25 to 75 liters per day. So there are parts that have 5 times more than others. Another thing that is very interesting is that the regions that provide water to the country and to Mexico City are the regions that do not have access to water. Water is exported from the high basins and from the sierras and forests where it is produced, and that is affecting very much agriculture and everyday life.
Well, how have we gotten to this situation that you're describing, not only of scarcity, but of extreme inequality in water distribution, with one part of the city getting 5 times as much as the other part?
Well, I wonder.
Yeah.
In Mexico, we have had governments in the past 30 years that have been very regressive in terms of social rights and in terms of human rights. And even if there was a change in the Article 1st of the Constitution in 2011, where the prevalence of human rights has to be respected in all the other laws, the policies are very much against human rights. I will put one example for Mexico City. They are about to approve a law. The struggle has been so strong that they have not dared to sign it. The law was approved, and now it is back in the assembly, the city council. And in
Because of opposition from people in the city?
Yeah. Before, you pay the water every 2 months. Now the payment has to be every month. And when a family doesn't pay more than 2 months, even if they are not consecutive, they not only have their water cut, which is against the general law of health, but they also have their sewage cut. And
they get completely pushed off the grid of basic services.
Absolutely. It is already happening in Puebla and in Torreón.
They already have that kind of a law there,
yes.
And they're doing it?
They are doing it, and it's a really, really grave health risk.
Of course. Was this a situation of corruption, a situation of money talks? Because when we talk about the west part of the city having more than adequate water, and then the eastern part, we're generally speaking talking about a poorer part of the city having less access to water. Is this the case in a general sense across the country?
Well, what you can see is that water is used for business, and inequality is not an issue between the politicians. It is very interesting that none of the political parties that are now campaigning for the presidency, none of the candidates has embraced water justice as a cause, even if 73% of Mexicans think that the human right to water and water as a common good is a priority.
Have they completely left it out of their platforms, their political platforms in the campaign?
They are ignoring this issue as a main issue in their campaigns.
And you think that it's for fear of alienating powerful business interests?
Yes, and also because they do not care very much about everyday life.
Well, here it is. It's part of the Mexican Constitution. It's fundamental to human life in all forms. How do you explain the fact that there hasn't been more of a priority in terms of public policy put on this problem?
There have been other priorities, and in fact, in Mexico we have had since 2012 very important reforms related to energy, communications, and the only reform that has not been approved is the water law. And they would like water as an accessory for the corporations' big productive activities, no? And not as a human right.
In both of these laws, the Mexico City one that went through the Legislative Assembly and is now back, and the national law that the ruling class, the pre-government, is trying to push through, there have been accusations that this would privatize the water system. Is this the way that you see it as well?
Yeah, it has been a process going on since President Vicente Fox offered water for the big corporations, and there have been a number of cities in Mexico that have already privatized water, like Saltillo, Puebla, Torreón, Veracruz. So it's a trend that goes against the world trend. Worldwide now, water has been re-municipalized. There is now back to public in 235 cities, very important cities like Paris, Berlin, Montevideo, Buenos Aires, Atlanta, and so on. But these companies that are kicked out of their homelands, in the case of Veolia and Suez, they were created in Paris, need to do business, and they come to Mexico, where they find a government that is very complacent to their demands.
Here in Mexico now, as we look at these laws and the possibility of privatization, what they say is that it's inevitable because otherwise they won't have the resources, the investment to fix the infrastructure and to maintain the system and all that. And yet what you're saying is that not only is it perhaps not inevitable, but there are places where they did privatize and now they're going back.
Yeah.
What were the reasons that it didn't work out for them?
Well, the water corporations have been very opaque. Their business is not transparent. Contracts normally are secrets. They finance themselves through signing agreements with the government and going for public bonds. So it would be much cheaper for the governments to look for financing directly. And of course, they have to have big benefits. That's what business is about. And
the profits.
well, that also means raising the tariffs in Mexico. In the cities where water has been privatized, the tariffs triple.
They
easily.
tripled?
Yeah.
Have there been protests there?
Yes, yeah.
What cities are
there has been also cases like in Ramos Arizpe where the movement has been able to re-municipalize the water. Saltillo is another case. It's also part of the Suez complex through Aguas de Barcelona. And as I said, Puebla, Torreón, Veracruz are examples of this. Also, corporations privatize infrastructure that was built with community and public funds. And they start charging the very people that owned their own systems. In Mexico,
sounds like a good deal for the companies.
Yeah. There is a big movement for community management. We have more than 10,000 communities that do water management in their locality. And some of them are very healthy. There is not a crisis there. So this water scarcity and the need for investment is a tale they have to tell in order to expropriate or to get to the public goods that they need
into private hands.
Yeah.
Which is a tendency, of course, that's characterized this neoliberal period of Mexico's history. Your organization, Water for All, has been studying what the impact of this kind of privatization law would be on Mexico. What have you found?
Mm-hmm. Well, the authoritarian management of water would stiffen. There many other cities and many other towns would suffer privatizations. Indigenous communities would lose their rights and their access to water. There would be not a serious concern for pollution. There are no public inspection of pollution, but they leave that to the companies. They would self-supervise.
Even the environmental aspects of assuring water quality would then be privatized. Yeah,
yeah. The same company that is managing the water would self-supervise.
That doesn't sound like a very safe situation for consumers.
Very, very risky. Tariffs would go up. There has been also an attempt to criminalize community water management. In the previous effort to privatize water during Korenfeld's tenure as director of the National Water Commission, there were penalties for communities that monitored, research, or intervene in their water. It would be only CONAGUAS.
What
the
were they
National
charged with?
Commission,
Oh, just the
fines. Yeah, also for the universities that studied water without the National Water Commission's permission.
So it's a model that's completely anti-democratic in terms
Totally,
of
yeah.
grassroots participation.
And water crisis has been so bad in Mexico, where also all the work they have done have not taken into account the soil conditions and rainwater behavior, and so it has worsened floods and natural disasters, like what happened in Guerrero about 3 years ago, with a storm causing so much damage.
Oh, yeah.
And also this law proposes self-help, not public safety, but every family has to take care of their own situation in case of disaster. So it is a very regressive approach. Unfortunately, there have been many experiences all over the country of water alternatives from the communities, from universities, and also from municipalities that are aware of this problem as a public problem.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about too, because you mentioned the fact that it was opposition from city residents that was able to block, for now anyway, the privatization law that was proposed in the Legislative Assembly. Who's opposing these kinds of models?
It's a very wide coalition called Water for All, Water for Life, in which you have communities like peasants, universities, you have unions, you have comunidades, Christian-based communities, indigenous people that have been very committed to water management. Community systems that are dealing with their own water, universities like Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, where we have been promoting water catchment in the school level, home level, and also by rescuing lakes that are very important reservoirs for water for human consumption.
Is this principally in the Valley of Mexico, where Mexico City is located, or does it go beyond that?
No, it reaches 27 states.
27 states.
It is a nationwide movement, like from Mexicali to Quintana Roo, from Chilpancingo to Jalapa, and in this movement we have exchanged experiences in water treatment. In the Mexican climate, makes all the northern recipes, all the way water is treated to be very costly and inefficient. And so our scientists have been promoting another approach to water treatment.
Like a U.S. model, rejecting a more U.S. model?
A more
high-tech?
Yeah, because of the climate. And so all these processes that were very mature and ready to be financed and ready to be replicated have been blocked. And that's how many of us decided to talk about the legal framework and how to apply our knowledge and how to promote solutions that are already in our hands. And we started building this coalition in order to write a citizens' law that promotes all this. The Constitution, when it was changed, had an article that said that there should be a water law in 360 days, starting from February 8, 2012. So we presented the water law the citizen water law on time, and the Congress didn't. And we have been gathering signatures and promoting this citizens law in order to present it next autumn in the next Congress.
So you've been working along two tracks: to support the alternatives, to produce alternative legislation, a different model, and at the same time to block this other tendency in the legislation that's actually been proposed by the ruling party and other parties. When did this all start? How did you begin this coalition?
Well, it started as soon as the Constitution was changed. In February, we started on March 13 to meet in different pre-congresses to convene a National Congress of Water Sustainability and Citizenship. And we were able to receive more than 400 scientifics and practicants in the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana on December 7 and 8, 2012. There we committed ourselves to write the citizens' law and also to promote a national coordination that we called Agua para Todos, Agua para la Vida, water for all, water for life. And we started building regional bases. This Congress was followed. We meet every 2 years by a Congress in the University of Guadalajara in 2014 and in Jalapa, Veracruz in 2016. And also we have national meetings to coordinate our different initiatives.
So it's made up of smaller local groups that get together in a network?
Yeah, it's like a broad coalition. And so we have these legal, technical, and organizational activities within the national coordination.
And you also mentioned that in addition to working on access to water and management of water, you've worked on the issue of pollution, which is also a big problem here in Mexico. What are you seeing in that regards?
Well, in Mexico City, the water from the east comes from underground waters. Like 2/3 of Mexico City's water comes from the underground, and they are very old. In Iztapalapa, they are from 5,000 to 8,000 years old, and so they are, we call
these
it
water
fossil.
reserves. The water reserves that we're drawing from for our consumption here in Mexico City.
Yeah, we call it fossil water. It has a lot of minerals. It is health hazardous, and it is one of the big problems. Another problem is that this very constant mining of water, or water mining, is provoking collapse. The soil is sinking, and it is breaking the sewage. And so a lot of the water is contaminated with sewage. It's also bringing big holes. We call it socavones, I don't know how to call that. That has cost lives and has made...
when like a street suddenly, there's a sinkhole in the middle of a street or something because the water's been depleted and it can no longer just support the surface.
In 2009, but every year it's worse. Also, the tubes in the water systems are very old. They have fungus, and there are many areas in Mexico City where when you open the grill, you find something like Coke, something really dark, and that's what people have to drink because there's no access to other kind of water.
Well, it's a fundamental problem for anyone. It's a basic element of life. And unfortunately, we've come to the end of the program, but I want to ask you to finish up, what can people do about this, people who live in Mexico City and other parts of the country?
Well, it is interesting that we are like in a water alphabetization campaign, like teaching people where water comes from and how you can, in a personal level, in a family level, community level, work for water catchment, for different ways of disposing sewage, for a commitment to knowing the law and knowing that this is now the opportunity to change the law and to build a democratic management. And we are calling this the citizen, to having the water authority being a citizen's task and not a business or authoritarian.
To completely remake the institutions for the management of water and the conservation of water toward the future.
Yeah, changing the paradigm, the way we conceive water. Before it has been to bring water from very far away and from very deep down to dispose it. In Mexico City, only 12% of the water is recycled. And now we say we have to change the paradigm and respect the water cycle and respect the human right to water.
You know, we get these terrible problems of scarcity and floods at the same time.
In the same area, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Pedro Moctezuma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being with us. We'll be back next week on Interviews from Mexico.